this moment, I'd like to welcome our last presenter, and that is Anthony Muiyuro, the chairman, chapter ISACA Kenya, with over 10 years experience in the industry, starting out as an IT assistant at Sarova Hotels. I think you're coming back home now. You're home. And he then joined the Digital Age Institute Limited as a business solutions analyst. At the moment, he is doubling up as a member of the advisory board at CIO Africa, and is also an associate director, cybersecurity leader for cybersecurity and privacy at KPMG. The floor is yours. Karibu sana, Anthony. Makofi kwake tafadhali as he comes to the stage. Karibu.
So my name is Anthony Muiyuro. Like you've heard, I lead cybersecurity for KPMG, and we are an advisory firm, also known as auditors and tax consultants, but we do a lot of advisory within, with a lot of businesses. So what I want to talk to you about as the slide is coming up, I know it's already Friday, and there's a song Ali sang last night, and it's still in my head. It's Friday, so absolutely. Excellent. So as we start, the topic that I want to talk about is a very, very interesting topic, and I'm going to try to simplify it because it's quite technical. We have techies in the room, but I'll really try just to come into the key salient points when we talk about zero trust. A very sexy subject because this is actually the new paradigm in cybersecurity. The book, the good book, which is my favorite book, the Bible, says that there's nothing new under the sun, right? And what we see even within today's infrastructures and how we've really modeled security to be is something that actually goes way back to the medieval ages, right? Where we have like the castle, the security paradigm was very simple. Let's keep the enemy out and let's retain the people that we trust in. So at the very periphery, you basically had, limited entry points. So if somebody wanted to get into the castle, there was only one way on how to get there. And then, of course, you had the guards who would verify and check your identity. You'd have the watchtowers, and this ideally would be like your firewalls, right? Where you have your policies that ideally just inspect the rules and all that. And then you have the inner walls, and this is an attempt of what we know as segmentation. As well, you'll also have the moat, which can be called also as a compensating control. That in case that castle, you close it, no one will be able just to go on the other side because there's a big sort of ditch with water and it's very deep, right? But again, today, this model is obsolete. It doesn't really work anymore. Why? Because we've seen this change in cybersecurity. Because when you look at your typical network infrastructure, that is basically just an image that would showcase that, you have maybe a flat architecture, and with that, you know that once anyone gets in, because of course you have your firewall, right? Then you have, the SPOF rather, single point of failure. If that firewall is not working, or if anyone ideally is able to circumvent it, then you're in trouble, because now everyone would have access to everything. Now, we run a team of elite ethical hackers, ethical being a key word there, and what we normally do is we try to do a bit of simulations, particularly attack and penetration testing. It's very interesting that once you get into that environment, inside particularly the server farms, there's something we call pivoting. Pivoting is running from one asset to the other. Now, I like Joe, in his earlier presentation, he talked about even ransomware. We all know ransomware, right? How many, by a show of hands, have ever been a victim of a ransomware attack? By a show of hands. Michi, obviously. All right? Okay, how many have never been a victim to a ransomware attack? Who can tell me when the first instance of a ransomware was detected? My tech is at the back. Who wants to guess? All right, lift your hands if you agree. After the year 2010, the first instance? Okay, in the 90s? One. In the 80s? One hand? Correct. The first instance of a ransomware was actually in 1989. Who was the perpetrator? A gentleman called Joseph L. Pip. We call him Baba Ransom, right? And who was the victim? WHO official. So what he did, he had a diskette, many diskettes, and he encrypted, and he actually had a virus, and he gave it to them. And he said that this is basically information relating to HIV and AIDS research. And we are actually towards, at the brink of getting a breakthrough. So all those WHO officials, what they did is that obviously they wanted to see the content, right? And these are scientists. Out of that curiosity, their machines were encrypted. Not really encrypted, but their files were actually hidden. And he had a note, for you to get the file, please wire this, not even wire, send this money to my address. Now, there's nothing new under the sun. What we are seeing today is basically a reincarnation of the same. Because ransomware has taken the similar model, but differently. Now is when they ask you to pay, the money in Bitcoin and all that. And that is what we see. So one of the key things, and the reason why I'm mentioning ransom, is because with all these ransom attacks, particularly the devastating ones, is that you'll see there's that element of laterally moving in terms of one machine gets infected and the rest also get infected. So, and that is basically where I want to really anchor my presentation on, because the landscape has typically changed. Today, you're looking at the key drivers for even this model of looking at network security, digital transformation. You want to have an organization that's digitally led, data-driven, insight-led, and platform-enabled. And then, of course, BYOD. Your staff are basically working from anywhere, particularly now with COVID. Work stopped to be places that you go to, but it's more of what you do. And then, of course, the pain points, like I mentioned, having a flat architecture. If for you to get access, maybe you're given at a single point, then if you were given that access, then you can literally access anything. There is nothing new under the sun. The image that I showed you of that castle, we used to have the Greeks who used to send what we now know as a Trojan horse, right? And this was a human, not really a human, a wooden horse that ideally had Greek soldiers inside. So they would give it to the king as a gift, but inside that, Trojan horse, that monument, you had these soldiers who are waiting for nightfall, and then they would attack, okay? The same thing is happening, because once you give people access, you don't know if this is really a trusted entity. So at the point of where you're giving them access, basically, they're good. But even when you're looking at even the insider threats, and now we're talking also about people, is the people that you trust the most of the times, particularly, they become a very good point of some of these attacks. And then, of course, top influencers, we have now vendors and thought leaders and even security leaders who are now giving thoughts and models, and frameworks as well, to this new paradigm, all right? And then, of course, not to forget hyperscale cloud environments, which has really, really gained momentum. So my definition, and I'm sorry, apologies, that is a bit wordy, but zero trust basically is not really a tool, but it's an approach. It's a thinking, it's a paradigm. It's a model of which you build your infrastructure to enable some of these key principles, because the key area and the key thing is basically to always verify. There is nothing as once trusted, always trusted. There's a time we did an experiment, and what we did is, it's called a rubber ducky attack. So you put a payload in like 100 USB flashes, and then in those USB sticks, we went to the car park, and we actually just threw them around. Now, what is the most natural thing for any person to do once they get a USB stick? They'll plug it in, right? Exactly. And this was basically a very big bank. So we had most of the people that ideally collected those USBs, we distributed them around. They still did the same. So at an endpoint level, you might be focusing on the firewalls and everything, but your enemy sometimes, oblivious to the fact, they might actually come from within. So when we talk about zero trust, is basically just looking at how then can we not have anyone, we're always suspicious, in terms of let's always verify for any entity, known or unknown. And that is basically the principle in zero trust. And the outcomes basically is, number one, it simplifies everything. Anyone can basically have access to your environment. You'll have an instance where maybe you need to scale up your teams. If you're dealing with RMs, you need new people to be able to plug in. So, and then, of course, it also improves the user experience, and which is an obvious gain, as well as simplifying the security operations. So, the future, and this is a very bold statement, and based on research, because Gartner have been doing a lot of publications on this. And right now, as we talk, they're actually saying that even VPN will slowly fade away. By the year 2020, the projection is that you'll have 60% of organizations going to now zero trust network access. So that means, as opposed to the traditional VPN, this is ideally going to change. And then it's really going to be more efficient, more effective, and your users are really going to be able to access your environments efficiently and with ease. So it enables secure, fast, and easy experiences from anywhere. People can work even in remote places. It's going to also help you to predict and plan defenses in real time. Again, user profiling. For instance, I cannot be in Mombasa, and like the example my dear friend Joe mentioned earlier, and still log in from a place like South Africa, right? It doesn't make sense. So there has to be that level of correlation of data in real time so that people can basically be able to respond. And then, of course, strategic enabling of the business. Now the business needs to grow. We've moved from where security basically is a bolt-on to now we're saying that, this is something that you have to have by design. Your security should be infused by design, not really something that comes afterwards. And then, of course, digitization, insight-driven data, orchestration is at the heart of zero trust approach because you're able now to get data from your devices. For instance, if you're connecting with your iPad, it should be able to detect and look at the profile in terms of, the security posturing. How is it? Is it patched? Is it updated? Do you have any inherent vulnerabilities before it gives you access to the environment? And then, of course, the typical scenarios that we'd have here is, number one, you need to be able now to enable even the DevOps team to be able just to work efficiently. And I don't know where George Njuguna is, but in the conversation they were having yesterday, some of the things and the workloads that even your DevOps ideally would be working on, you'd find that they're sensitive in nature. You don't want anyone to be able to access it. Number two, remote workers. It's also a very growing phenomenon because now we'll have more people working remotely. You need to enable your end users. You need to have visibility into these environments, both on cloud and also on-prem. You also need to have a seamless experience. Now, there's a joke someone made that in Nairobi, we have a zero trust approach to life, right? That you never trust anyone, right? Kanairo, yeah? So again, similar thing, always verify. You want to make sure, my network as it is, we have the right entities coming into place. We have the right people ideally accessing the environment. So what are the benefits of this? The first one is you are not going to have the silos because anyone can access anything anywhere, but again, security is still at the heart of it. And then, of course, it all reduces your capital expenditure. I was reading a report that 31%, a zero trust approach will reduce your IT costs by 31%. And it also reduces your risks, IT-related risks, by 37%. And that's by Forrester, right? I totally agree. Because why? You're able also now to look at this different layer of technology. And let me just remind you, that when you talk about zero trust, it's not really a tool, yeah? Very technical, different vendors have a view, but it's really an approach and a model that you need to build upon. The tools only come to enable it, okay? Are we together up to that point? To go, is anyone sleeping in my class? All right, so stick with me, all right? So, yeah, and then, of course, obvious misnomers. In terms of what zero trust is, and it's not. Again, we said it's all about verification. We will trust you, yes, but are we sure you are the person? Are you sure? Are we sure this is a device that's supposed to be connecting, all right? So it's not about trusting no one only, but it's also about verifying. And then, of course, it's not a next generation perimeter. I have a thing that I always flag whenever. And I know vendors, sometimes we have this habit. We want to show that this is the next generational thing. We have to be very careful because, I don't know, I've sat with different organizations and I've seen, particularly even as CIOs, and it's good we understand this, particularly when something doesn't work, but you really sold it as the next gen tool, then how do you explain yourself afterwards? It puts you in a very precarious position. Do you agree? Excellent. So those are some of the words that sometimes I always say, let's use with caution. It's also not VPN modernization, and it's definitely not an off-the-shelf product. That's a big misnomer because, again, It's not a tool and it's not a silver bullet approach. It's something that you build upon. It's something that you do over time using different tools and different approaches as well. And then it's not an IT-only project. Of course, the business has to work together. You need the business to guide you in terms of, what kind of apps, what kind of information do our people, particularly the ones that are accessing it remotely, need to have, so that you're able to apply the right and effective security policies. And then, of course, it's not eliminating your intranet. But what it is, it's a business enabler. It's an architectural and a principle basically driven by certain tenets. And then, of course, there will no, in terms of security-wise, there will not be a difference between the internet and the intranet. You'd be able to access, for instance, all your company resources seamlessly. You don't have to go through, on the front end, it's going to be seamless, but on the back end, the security is now enshrined. And then, of course, it reduces complexity, combines processes and technology, as well as giving your users a unified experience. Now, the principles to this framework, and I think I'm wrapping up, is the first thing is that perimeterless design. It has to be, and recall my earlier illustration, that when you have that castle-like approach to security, ideally it's only dependent on you have a single point of entry, you have a single point of exit. That is going to be blurred because why? A perimeter design will also, perimeterless design gives you, a seamless experience where you don't really have to go through one point, but it's actually enshrined on the back end. And then, of course, context aware. It has to understand your devices. You need to get data. So some of these tools, and it's amazing, even VMware, they have amazing stack of solutions, and we're having a chat with Evelyn, that it's a combination of different tools. You need to look at your environment and really assess what is the need there. And I always say, have a TOM, a target operating model. What is your picture of success? Because once you start plugging in the tools, then ideally it's coming into rhythm, right? So, and then of course, dynamic access controls, and particularly where we're talking about some of this authorization, authentication level controls, it's very important. And then continuous assessment. So like we said earlier, you're not really trusting anyone. So you have to continuously assess and basically look at, are you at the right state, or have we lost trust? Particularly from an endpoint and people point of view, and then fine-grained segmentation, or otherwise called as micro-segmentation. This is particularly very important because when you're able to create at a very granular level those trust zones so that you can avoid things like lateral movements, particularly of some of those, like I mentioned, ransomware, or even people who are trying to attack you. So it also enables that. And at the heart of it, Zero Trust is all about that. Risk analysis, data you'll be getting to also be able just to do your risk analysis. And then you're able also to review the trust and monitor continuously. So that is a framework. I don't want to go into it in the interest of time, but basically just brings everything that I've mentioned together. Remember, this is not a tool, it's an approach. The tools just come to enable that approach. So you look at orchestration and automation. How do you get this data to correlate it to a level where it's going to give you meaningful insight? And then at the different layers, at the network layer, identity layer, which is also pegged to your devices, and also workload, particularly looking at cloud environments, as well as data. And this is where we look at things to do with classification, encryption, and obfuscation, as well as data flows. How does data move in and out of the environment, all right? So, and visibility and analytics, data is at the heart of this thing. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I have much to say, but just to end my presentation, these are the key subtle ways I think my punch PPT, my punch page, if I may call it that number one, you need to have network micro-segmentation. We need to do these segmentations at a very granular level so that we have those trusted nodes. And then you make it easier for lateral movement, or, and you're able also to contain attack when it's happening. Because we've said that we, as an industry, we've moved from just cybersecurity to now cyber resilience. And what is cyber resilience? The ability to withstand an attack. Because when you're hacked, always take the position as an organization that one day this thing will happen. But when it does happen, what are you going to do after that? how can you contain and control an attack? And then, of course, SDP, have people access things on a need-to-know basis, limit access, and so on and so forth. And lastly, proxy, which we call trust brokers. Before anyone accesses a resource, should ideally be able to pass through a broker. So again, that's my time. I hope this is insightful. We are happy to always share a lot of knowledge. Please visit KPMG site. We have a report that we recently released. It's called a CIO Outlook report. So we wanted to understand what keeps, particularly in East Africa, our CEOs up at night. So if you're a technologist and if you're, you want to advise businesses and also you want to understand what is the landscape from a CEO lens perspective, that report will definitely be insightful to you. Thank you very much and enjoy your dinner. Bye.